Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Deeper Podcast. And today I am joined by Habeeb Akande. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Pronounced it perfectly.
Okay, good. And I'm so excited for this one because this is very different than my normal episodes. So, Habib is a UK-based sex educator, a published author, and a public speaker. He's written several books on sexology, the art of seduction, and the ancient African practice for pleasuring women called Kunyaza. He's passionate about female sensuality and aims to close the gender orgasm gap. I am so honored to have Habib here. So, Habib, welcome. So, let's get started just briefly with who you are. And maybe a nice question is, what are you creating right now? What are you building right now?
Thank you for inviting me first and foremost, Sophie. It's my pleasure. So my name is Habeeb Akande. I'm a British-born Nigerian sex educator and writer, amongst other things. I mean, you gave a wonderful introduction. I'm not sure what I can add more to that. To be honest, yeah, I write books. I like to talk about sex. I'll give workshops now and again, and I just like to have open and honest conversations with both men and women about sex and sensuality in order to kind of not only close the orgasm gap, but also to close the pleasure gap. So I think there's a lot of a focus on people attaining an orgasm, and like we're very goal orientated, particularly in the West. Whereas with my work, I try to concentrate on pleasure because not everyone can and will experience an orgasm, whereas everyone can experience pleasure. So I'm more concentrated on trying to close the pleasure gap. But because everyone speaks about orgasm gap, I kind of use that. And trying to help people like embrace their sexuality and sensuality, especially women as well. I think it's very important.
Amazing, beautiful. We were just talking before this, and you were talking about, I think your last two books which were very much about intimacy and sensuality in Africa, and I think Kunyasa is mostly about Rwanda, if I'm correct, right? Sort of.
That is correct. That is correct. So with Kunyaza, it's a book about, like you mentioned, the ancient African technique of Kunyaza, which helps women squirt and achieve orgasms during heterosexual encounters. And that book is both for men and women to read. Whereas my previous book, which we spoke a little bit earlier offline, was actually my third book, was targeted at men, and it was about womanizing and the art of female pleasure from a male perspective and targeting to men. Now, womanizing, I know it's got it has a lot of negative connotations, but it's something which, even for myself at a relatively young age, it fascinated me. A lot of men secretly admire men that are womanizing, not necessarily the deceit that's involved, but in terms of the ability to not only pleasure, but to attract multiple women. I think that's something that a lot of men are interested in. But then I wanted to speak about some of the pitfalls, as well as some of the, you could say, benefits of womanizing. I was someone from a relatively young age I was quite reckless and trying to be a womanizer and doing certain things, and not something that necessarily I'm proud of, but it's something I'm appreciative of that experience I've had, because it helped me to not only to understand things from a different perspective, but also when I'm delivering workshops, I can understand the psyche of a lot of men, and even kind of, like I said, when I'm speaking about the pitfalls of womanizing and the different categories of womanizing. So there's some men who are like, I've laid out like, who are like lion womanizers, and there's some men who are like hyena womanizers.
What's the
differentiation between the two? So a lion womanizer is a man that is sexually disciplined. He may have multiple, again, I'm originally from Nigeria, multiple wives or multiple sexual partners, but they all are aware of his other female partners. So he's someone that's respected by women and is able to satisfy women's both their physical and emotional needs. So he's someone that both men respect and women respect. Now, the hyena womanizer is probably what today we would call the fuckboy. It's someone who's deceitful, if someone is who's not disciplined, as in he can't control his sexuality. So any woman, even if there's a lot of men who are monogamous on paper or in terms of their appearance, but they're secretly womanizers. And this is a type of hyena womanizer who is someone who professes to be in a committed relationship, but any opportunity he gets, he wants to sleep with another woman, whether that's by way of having a girlfriend or via prostitution. So unbridled lust. And that's something that I'm kind of more getting to, okay, how can you go from a hyena womanizer, which I think a lot of men have that struggle in terms of dealing with their sexuality and their desire to become someone. If you want to pursue that route, you're someone that's respected. And then, like as in the lion, womanizer. And then obviously there are some men who are perfectly happy to be in a committed monogamous relationship, and that's not obviously a womanizer, but that's a different type of manhood or masculinity that I kind of delve into in my book. So I had to kind of clarify with womanizing, because when I mention womanizing, everyone looks at it like it's a deplorable thing, when for me there are aspects of womanizing which can be praiseworthy, and there's some aspects of womanizing where it involves deceit and manipulation, which again is not something that I'm kind of endorsing or praising, but something that I'm speaking about because it's a reality that many men experience or are enamored by with other men, kind of thing. So
yeah, I love what you're talking about now. I work a lot with the archetypes, and there's the wounded archetype, who is like the seducer, but he abuses his sexuality to like always be the alpha. So there's a bit of a misuse of sexuality of like, oh, if I am that like hyena, then I'm in control and I'm top dog, and towards both women and his male friends. When there's also a mature version who's just like, yeah, I know who I am, I know what I give, I'm transparent, I'm honest, I'm in integrity, everybody knows what's going on, and I'm still very attractive or irresistible or whatever it is, and I love women, or I love the feminine, right? And that's such a different way. And like you can see a lot of like, especially younger men, like can be very much in the hyena category and in the wounded and the hurt. Why do you think why do you think so many are in the hyena category and not in the lion?
I think, again, mainly speaking from the perspective of in the Western world, I think in the Western world, we are a lot of men. There's a crisis of masculinity. As in, we are taught from the films that we see, from the movies that we watch, from the music we listen to, from the bravado from our friends, to sleep around, to have multiple women, and that's something that defines you as a man. That's something that is going to earn brownie points with your male friends, and a lot of men are seeking validation and approval from their male friends, and it's something that we're told that women desire and women like.
Yeah.
So that's something that pushes us. And then again, especially when you're relatively young and you're maybe sexually immature, you could be sexually experienced, but you could still be immature. And that's something that I think a lot of men have, that they think that the stronger you are, the more masculine you are, is how many multiple partners you have. And because we live in a culture which is defined everything by something that you can quantify, we're obsessed by how many female partners you've had, how many times you've made an orgasm, and things like that. Whereas obviously the more you mature and the more you know yourself and the more you're transparent, you're thinking about, okay, what do I like? I might be someone who's more than happy to be in a relationship with just one woman that I've met from 16 years old until the rest of my, but because that narrative isn't taught to men, we're socially conditioned to be this hyena, sexually unbridled lust. Right? Yeah. Whereas when you grow up, or what you're seeing on TV, or what's put towards women, is that the ideal man is someone that is monogamous, he's committed, he's someone who can control his sexuality. But that messaging is not actually received to men. Women hear it, but men don't hear it, so there's a disconnect. And I think a lot of men, because they've received that social condition from a relatively young age, it's difficult, even if you get to the age of maybe like late 20s, early 30s, when you are quote unquote supposed to settle down, to then be this mature archetype, when you've just been told from a relatively young age that you're just supposed to be someone who is sexually weak. And it's quite strange that although we praise men for being strong in their strength, when it comes to the realm of their sexual desires, we actually praise men who are weak. As in, a lot of men would tease other men if, for example, they were in a position where there was an attractive woman who said, "Would you like to sleep with me?" and they said no. Did you understand? Like, because they're not interested, or they're committed to their partner, what have you. A lot of men would actually make fun of that man and say, "What kind of man are you?" When in reality, that's true strength. Anyone could. It's about being in control of your sexual desires and your sexuality, and that's something that I think a lot of the ancients taught from as far back as the Kama Sutra. They spoke about, yes, we know sexual desire is something that a lot of us have within us, but the true definition of a man or a strong man is someone who can control that. It's not that desire in and of itself is evil. It's the one who's able to control that. Whereas I think a lot of men, especially in the Western context, we haven't been taught that, okay, yes, we know that you've got desire. Yes, it's not blameworthy to have this desire, and we know that sometimes it can and I mentioned to you an Arab proverb, which I love, that when a man has an erection, he loses 2/3 of his intellect, which a lot of men realize. And it's the male experience, and it can be the female experience as well. I think especially with a lot of men or masculine men is that we can be very strong and butch and, you know, the alpha male, so to speak. But when it comes to our desires, a lot of us are very weak and we haven't developed the ability to control that. And we're not taught that this is something that you need to control. And this is true strength. Whereas we're actually taught the opposite, that if like a Beyonce or a Rihanna or whoever's like considered to be highly desirable, if she presents herself to you, you have to sleep with her. Yeah. Which is ridiculous. That's what men are taught, even if they're in committed long-term relationships. So so that's why I think the mixed messaging that a lot of men receive is responsible why a lot of men, especially younger men, are kind of in this hyena category. And again, a lot of the education or sex or sensuality education a lot of men receive is miseducation, and that's either by way of porn, which is generally focused on the male gaze and just all about how a man should penetrate a woman when he's not actually really satisfying her. And because I don't think enough men have open and honest conversations with women. I think we have conversations with women, but not always open and honest, where both the man and the woman is allowing themselves to be vulnerable and speak about their insecurities and their fears and the anxieties that they do have, because both men and women have. We hear a lot about the issues that women have, which is important, but we don't really hear about some of the insecurities that men have in the bedroom, whether it's performance anxiety. A lot of men suffer from premature ejaculation. A lot of men suffer, and a lot of you have to understand, for a lot of men, the idea of sleeping with a woman is like you have to be the man, you have to be virile, you have to not last too long because you don't want to bore her, but you can't be too quick. So you have to have like a happy medium, but it's something where, if, for example, you've satisfied yourself within a certain period of time, is that good? Are you good in bed, or are you only good in bed when the woman validates your experience? And also when other men are saying that you've done a quote unquote good job. So there's a lot of pressure placed on men as well. But I think there isn't enough spaces where men can have these open and honest conversations, especially with their peers, especially with their friends. Men would probably would rather have this conversation with maybe an outsider or someone that they don't really know, because they won't be judged. Because a lot of men, we judge our manhood either by how much money we make or how good we are in the bedroom, the size of our penis, our ego, all of these things. So there's a lot of pressure that a lot of men have. And I think in comparison, so obviously coming originally from Nigerians, speaking to some of my older uncles about relationships and sex and women, they would use a lot of humor, but they were very forthright in speaking about some of these issues. So what's now considered to be sexual ethics, consent, all of these terms that is bounded about today, they spoke about it when I was really young, but in a different language, so to speak. And they use a lot of humor. So as a man, I didn't feel a way to open up to a woman. I didn't feel a way to be like, okay, I need to learn from you in terms of what you like. Whereas nowadays, I think a lot of men, because they haven't had that upbringing or that training, they don't even know how to communicate desire, how to communicate, okay, what do you want in the bedroom? So I just think that, and again, in the Western context, a lot of men, they need kind of safe spaces where, whether it's by way of workshops, whether it's going to like a sex coach like yourself, or reading books, to kind of learn, okay, there's different types of masculine or masculinity. And I think that's something that a lot of men are kind of maybe feel pressured that they just have to be this, I don't know, this Johnny Bravo type, Arnold Schwarzenegger figure who is a mandingo in the bedroom that can last for ridiculously long period of time. And at the same time is a romantic, like someone from Spain, and then they also can sound like he's from like someone from, I don't know, like Brazil or something. So there's a lot of pressure on men. And I think there isn't many spaces where men can kind of navigate in terms of to be the man that they want to be, rather than the man that society or some parts of society are telling them they should be.
There's so many good things in what you just said. The reason I started this podcast is because I think a lot of women don't realize how men have been brought up and how confusing that is and how much pressure that is. Just hearing also from you, like that pressure of like sleep with everybody, and like if a sexy woman is in front of you, you should go there, or you're expected to. And then at the same time having this like unspoken expectation from women of like this monogamous, committed, calm man, and just like who are you supposed to please? And so that also creates these like weird layered lives where there's a life that the outside world sees, and there's a life that's secretly happening because you have to please all these different stories. So that I love that you spoke about that, because it's also, I think a lot in how women speak about men, there's so much pain and blame and disappointment without actually understanding, like, hey, what's your story? You know, what did people teach you? What was expected from you? Right. So I love that you brought that in. And I give this to, when I work with my male clients, I teach them this whole concept of like, if let's say you don't want to, there's an option that you don't always have to penetrate her, right? Actually feel if you want to be inside of her. There's an option for you to go like, actually, I don't want to today. Like, we don't teach men that. We teach women that, right? Like, feel if you actually want this or not. And you can say no, and there's consent. But do we actually work from that for men, that there's a consent concept? Is that something you've ever looked into?
Yeah, so I would say that it was refreshing to hear what you mentioned about there, like when we speak about women speak about their sexual desires as a form of empowerment, whereas with men we don't really hear that.
Yeah.
To be honest, a lot of men that I speak to in closed spaces, they share that sentiment, but they wouldn't vocalize it in public because they're fearful of the backlash. And this idea that a lot of men are, and I think it plays into this idea that a lot of men are confident in the bedroom. We don't suffer from performance anxieties. There's no insecurities that men have, and all men are empowered. Whereas I don't think that's the case, and I think there is a definitely lack of empathy towards men. So even when we're taught about, and there's a lot of great areas. So even when we're speaking about consent, a lot of men haven't been taught in terms of understanding what is consent and what is it that a woman likes or what are a woman's needs, because they've been, I was going to say educated or miseducated, like much of us, from what they've seen on TV, from their friends, and even from porn. So it's funny when you mentioned about like, for example, women, in terms of you can have sexual relations without actually necessarily involving penetration, and that's something that women are aware of and are interested in. Whereas with men, I think because a lot of us, we define sex just by penetration. If I've done everything apart from penetrated the woman, then it doesn't count. That's like, and it feels like that's what we've been taught from a relatively young age. So for a man, in order to kind of actually have relations, I need to have sexual intercourse with her, not I need to give her orgasm, because obviously there's many ways you can pleasure a woman without necessarily penetrating her. But because of what we've been taught, sex begins when I enter the woman's vagina, or the man enters the woman's vagina, and ends when I ejaculate. And that's a problem. So I think we need to reframe or redefine what it means to have sexual relations with someone of the opposite sex. So I think we need to have more open spaces, and I think we need to empathize with men, but at the same time, because I think it's important that although it's good to have women-only spaces, men-only spaces, they can speak and open up. I think it's important we have spaces where both men and women can speak or hear each other's perspectives or stories, like you said, and empathize with one another. Because I think the problem with a lot of men is that we don't learn to empathize with women or women's experience or sexual experience until either we have a daughter or until we get married or something horrific happens to a woman that we care about. So you hear a lot of men will say, "Oh, so now I've got a daughter. I'm fearful about, how women are treated." And then I always ask the question, do you need a daughter in order to empathize with women?
Yeah.
But then the other side with women, some women only maybe have that sense of empathy when they have a son, that they can empathize that, okay, maybe their son was involved in this situation or accused of whether it's domestic abuse or sexual abuse or what have you. And then because it's their son, they give the person the benefit of that. No, I don't see this, like they see the nuances and the complexities in that particular situation. It's not black and white. So I just think we need to just create more spaces where we can have, I think, open dialogue between the two genders, not just women-only spaces and men-only spaces. But I think it's a tough ask in this day and age, just because, again, I think it's good that more women are speaking about their sexual rights and sexual desires. But I do think it's important, especially within the heterosexual space, that we open up to allow men's voices to be heard. And I think there's a lot of men that they don't feel comfortable to kind of speak openly, honestly, about not only the insecurities, but even what they want in the bedroom, because again, they will kind of they're likely to be shut down, especially in the public realm.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you about something because I heard you speak into this in a different. I was listening to one of your other podcasts, and it was that here in the West, I think the way we are raised about sex, it's very transactional. So, right, like what you're talking about right now, it's very transactional. It's not about this like experience that you're creating together. And I know that, I think I remember correctly from that recording that I listened to, was that you, part of why you wrote Kunyaza was to move from this like transactional pleasure towards like the Rwandan way of looking at intimacy, which is a pleasure-based experience. Can you speak a bit about that? Because yeah, like I was raised in Tantra, and I know that like Tantra for me was such a different way of looking at intimacy that as I went into like the normal world here and I went to college and all these things, I just thought like, it's so weird to me how we speak about sexuality and intimacy and partners and lovers and all these things, and what everybody's goal is, because it seems like often almost a mutual masturbation rather than an interaction between two people. So I'd love to hear a bit about like also what you were discussing in Kunyaza. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So when I came across the Kunyaza practice, what blew me away with this obviously traditional East African practice, but it's also practice in other parts of Africa and now even in different countries around the world, is that their understanding about sex was one that it's about pleasure. It's pleasure orientated. And what that means is that the way we understand sex, especially in the Western world, it's all about, like I said, the transaction, intercourse, penetration.
Yeah.
Whereas in Rwanda and the countries that have this Rwandan practice of Kunyaza, it's about pleasure and it's not necessarily about penetration. And the onus is on the man to ensure that his female partner is sexually satisfied in the bedroom. And that can manifest itself either by way of squirting, which many people are fascinated by, or by way of orgasm. So even though a lot of people are really, especially in the West, they're obsessed with, oh, Kunyaza, this practice that helps women squirt. Yes, it has that reputation and women can squirt, but that's not the goal of Kunyaza. The goal is to make sure the goal is female pleasure. The goal is women's pleasure. And however that, again, that can manifest itself by the way of an orgasm or squirting or just a woman having a blissful, enjoyable experience. And that's something which, because the man from a relatively young age and the women from a relatively young age, they're taught that women are entitled to pleasure and sex or sexual activities doesn't just involve penetration or intercourse, then they've got a different understanding or different repertoire in terms of what they should do in the bedroom, because it's all about exploration. It's all about sensuality. It's all about exploring. And the good thing is, because it involves the man using his penis to stimulate the woman's not only clitoris, but vulva and vulval area and labia minora, he's exploring her erogenous zones in the genitalia, not just focus on the clitoris. So that's something that, again, is teaching the man. Some of the benefits for the man is that it's helping him even how do I say it? It's helping him be sexually disciplined, because normally, especially from a Western perspective, it's like the jackpot's there, she's opened her legs, I need to enter. Where it's like, no, wait, hold on. You're supposed to take your time. Don't even think about entering, think about ensuring that she's pleasured, and then maybe you might enter. So the whole idea of like, and it's similar to like, from my understanding, I've got limited understanding of tantric sex, but the whole sensuality or slow sex, which is not about goal-orientated orgasm, which many people in the West are, again, I think are obsessed by. It's more of a holistic approach in Kunyaza, in the Kunyaza method. So that's why for me, it was something that I think was, I think it's something that a lot of women can benefit from, because they can enjoy more pleasurable experiences without necessarily having to worry about having an orgasm via penetrative intercourse, when we know that most women aren't able to regularly orgasm via that route. And with men, it helps them be more sexually disciplined in the bedroom and to control themselves. And it can help them with like semen retention and things like that, because it's not just about ejaculation, and sex isn't just defined by, like I said, when you penetrate a woman until when you ejaculate. So it just gives a different understanding about sex and sensuality. And it's one that, which I like, is more focused on women's pleasure as opposed to male pleasure, which I think we get from in the West, that sex is, like you said, transactional, and it's more geared to when the penis enters the vagina and when the penis ejaculates, that's when sex begins and that's when sex ends. whereas Rwanda's Kunyaza practice is more holistic and it's more, because they circular and it's more focused on women's pleasure as opposed to male pleasure.
I love this. I love how you right away said, like, you pretty much wrote a book on how to help women squirt, and it's not about the technique. And it's actually not about the techniques. I love that. And your book is about to be delivered, so I cannot wait to read it. I read a book that spoke about some part of this. It's called Women's Anatomy of Arousal. And it just explains that, like, the vulva is erectile tissue. So you have to pleasure it first so that it actually swells up before you can even enter it. And I'm like, why is this not common knowledge? It's not just about like lubrication. It's actually that it needs to swell up and it needs time to do that. Right. And to see it in such a different way than just like, okay, we're there, let's just do it. It's such a different way of looking at it. And it's so unfortunate that all of these like things that seem so beautifully, it's actually a beautiful thing, right? That it's not being taught. It's not like a normal thing that's being spoken about. And and I think you write that in the book as well, that like the principle of Kunyasa is passed down through elders. Right?
That's correct. So the origin of the story, there was a Rwandan queen who her husband was away on a military expedition and she was in need of gratification. So she summoned one of her guards to make love to her. And the guard was petrified because he was thinking about the ramifications if the king found out. So the story goes that as he approached her, and she said, if you don't make love to me, I'm going to get you executed. I'm going to get you killed. So as he was holding his penis, he started to shake and he was trembling because he was petrified. And as he approached her, his penis started to strike her vulva and clitoris. And from there, it was said that a gush of fluid emanated from her loins, and that produced the Lake Kivu in East Central Africa. And from there, the Kunyaza tradition was came to being. And then when the king came back, it was said that she taught her husband, this is how you're supposed to make love to me, and this is what I expect from you. And since then, again, I think that story is probably a myth, but it's told in Rwanda. But since then, women, elderly women known as sengas or maternal aunts, they teach other young women from the village about Kunyaza, about their sensuality, about the fact that women are entitled to pleasure. So it's not just about this is what your man is supposed to do to you in the bedroom. You're just supposed to lie down and take it. This is what you're supposed to teach him in terms of how you like to be pleasured. So that's taught from women from a relatively young age. It's passed down from generation to generation, and it's known as like Africa's secret to female pleasure. So for me, when I came across this tradition, I think it's about 2016. Sorry, I was amazed by it. And again, this we've got this pleasure positive, female positive, or feminine orientated technique or cultural practice from Africa, that why don't we hear about it? Even myself, although I'm from West Africa, that why didn't I hear about this? And it's something that when I reached out to a number of people in Rwanda and wanted to learn more about it, one of the things that they did say, and that's something that I wanted to kind of be careful with in terms of how I was delivering not only the message but writing a book, is not to focus just so much on the technique itself. Because before you even get to practice Kunyaza, the man needs to make sure that his female partner is emotionally and physically and psychologically ready for sexual interactions. So it's not just about, because I think in the West, because again, we're focused so much on the goal. So squirting, it's like, if I do this tap, tap, tap technique, she's going to squirt, and it doesn't work like that. So the woman needs to, so that's why, and again, a lot of the onus is placed on men in terms of how you're supposed to seduce your wife or your partner, and how you're able to make sure she feels relaxed in the bedroom. And she need to feel entitled to pleasure, because the man can do everything that he's supposed to do, but if the woman doesn't feel, which unfortunately is something which a number of women in the West deal with, because a lot of women do not feel entitled because of the shame and other things, they don't feel entitled to pleasure, their mind shuts down, they can't open up, they won't be able to enjoy themselves in the bedroom. So that's why it's twofold: the education passed to women and education passed towards men. And because again, I think it's a practice which both men and women can not only learn from but enjoy. For me, I think, and again, like I said, it just gives us a different definition or different example of how you can enjoy sexual relations and ultimately experience mutual pleasure, which for me sex is a sacred act and should be enjoyed both by the man and the woman, not just about male pleasure, and you disregard women. So
Yeah, beautiful. So beautiful. I noticed when I started going into your work and I started reading about it, there was a part of me that kind of felt like, oh, this is a tricky topic and it's a bit personal for me to share this. So I also want to preface that, but that I used to be somebody who squirted a lot, and it never helped because it put men into their ego. Because it became this thing of like, oh my God, look at how many times I can do that. And it created more disconnect. And so when I was reading your book, I was like, wow, it on the one hand, it's this beautiful thing. And it's also not about the goal. And when a woman does feel free to do that, it's so gorgeous. I can see that from like the feminine empowerment. And I know in my own experience, it's actually been painful, hurtful emotionally, because it became it brought men into their egos more than anything. So I'm really curious on your perspective on that, or if you've heard that before, because yeah, it made it more like it made me a performance thing for many years, or that's at least how I experienced it. And this was like 10 years ago. I was much younger, and it's not the case anymore. But I know that also from other women who have had that they were more orgasmic in that sense, that it actually created more disconnect with their male lovers. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard different, similar to what you've said in stories, and it's something which is quite troubling, because it's that on one hand I've heard some examples where women feel, or men feel that, oh, I've done this to you, and they don't want to open up, and it's just like, and then you become, some women have said like they feel like they become like their male lovers' plaything, sex plaything. So it's like they don't want to open up, they don't want to even because again, for the man, and that's something which again from my understanding of the Kunyaza tradition, it's not the man makes the woman orgasm, he helps the woman experience an orgasm. It's a different understanding. So even the understanding of words. So even when we use we generally say this person, I made her orgasm, where it's no, you helped or facilitated her experience an orgasm. So it's just a different mindset, and that's something that again I think because we've kind of adopted this again. It's very, excuse my language, a phallocentric word or language, where everything is about the man. I do this to you. Excuse my language, I fucked you. I did this to you. So, and everything is you're being done to. So it's not something that you actually engage or enjoy. You're just doing it as a result of my actions. Whereas if it's no, this is something that you experience, that a woman experiences an orgasm. She can experience it by herself, or she can experience it with a male partner. It doesn't mean that the partner has done this to her, if that makes sense. So I just think we just need to reframe our understanding, especially with the men. It's not just about you doing this to her. And again, with the Kunyaza tradition or with women squirting, I think at least it's good, because I think there's some women who, and I've heard a number of women who have had experiences where they've squirted, but they didn't know they thought it was urine because of what they've been taught, and they've been led to believe that it's urine because of what their male partners have said, and they felt a sense of shame. And that's even more troubling today, that they've got these mental hang-ups they need to overcome. And then you have some women who, similar to what you've said, who feel like, okay, I don't want to do this because now it's like I'm just performing to you, and that's not what it's about. Whereas it's supposed to be a pleasurable experience that we both enjoy, not something that you've done this to me and then I'm no. So again, I just think it's about reframing, and especially with men sometimes, although I think our ego is important, we need to put our ego aside, especially when it comes to intimacy. It's not about I need to do this to you, I need to, so it's just I think it's important, because when we have when there's conversations like this and people listening in, then they realize, oh, I can relate to that because I felt the same, or I do feel the same. So I just think it's just unpacking some of the maybe miseducation or trauma that people have experienced, and realizing and to normalize women's desire and normalize women's pleasure. I think that's important, not just normalize sex, because again, when people talk about sex, we generally think about the transactional approach rather than desire and pleasure, and that can manifest itself differently from individual to individual. So that's why I think having such conversations and allowing people to see different perspectives, and people will change even over a period of time.
I want to bring a perspective in on also how I teach squirting in my work, is that it's actually a gigantic emotional release. And it's intimate in the sense that, like, if you see what happens during squirting, it's like your entire pelvic floor does like this very gigantic movement. And it's very intimate for the person who's in it. It's very intimate. It's really deep personal stuff, right? And so to actually allow yourself to even go there, especially if you have a worry that it might be urine, for instance, or like to think, it requires such surrender to the moment that if the masculine or the man isn't aware of how intense it actually is to go through it, and that especially if you think it as a performance piece, you take away so much of the magic. So much of the magic. I actually teach squirting to my women as an emotional release tool. If you can't cry, see if you can awaken that, because it actually awakens emotions. It allows the body to flow again, to open up, but it's very intense. It's big. It's very big. And so I don't think we always realize that, because of also how porn has taught us what all these sexual things are. We don't realize it's such a big thing in the body. It's such, and it requires such surrender. And so, yes, if you know which buttons to push, great. But actually you're then forcing maybe a woman to go into an experience that maybe she's not ready to. Right. And so that, I just wanted to bring that perspective in, because I don't think we see squirting as the sacred act it actually is. And that's why I love that you wrote a book about this, and that there's this like ancient African technology, and it's the word is beautiful, so that you actually see it as a ceremony almost, rather than like, I know which buttons to push because I watched the YouTube video, right?
And even even like, so even like with, I mean, I use squirting because that's the popularized term that's used nowadays. But even like in how they refer to squirting, they refer to it as either like water or the sacred water. So it doesn't have this. Because I do know that a number of people aren't comfortable with the word squirting, because they link it to porn, and they think about it being performative. I just use squirting just because, again, it's popularized. Whereas if I were to say female ejaculation, or the female fountain, or the woman's fountain, that's, some people might, I lose some people. But I love what you said about, and I think it's important, like women being able to surrender themselves. And I think it's important that even with the male partners, that, I'm trying to how to explain it. It's like when I teach men, it's like you have to, especially when a woman, either by way when she's experiencing orgasm or squirting or an ejaculation, you're present, but you have to take yourself out of that.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that you have to be present but not be present, because sometimes when as a man, and probably men can understand this or relate to this, if you are visibly present and she can feel that you're present, and she might feel that you're judging her, she won't open up and enjoy the experience. So you need to kind of at least kind of either take yourself out of that, or like mentally, so she doesn't feel that you're judging her. So you're present, but you're not present, or she doesn't feel your presence, if that makes sense. You're present, but not presence in her mind. And I think that's something that kind of helps a woman like really enjoy that experience. And I think that's something that as men, sometimes we kind of want to put ourselves there to the point where, like I had one, you could say male client I was speaking to, and he said when his partner was squirting, he just wanted to say, I'm doing it. I said, no, that's when you're supposed to let it go. Not it's like, he was like, yeah, I've done it. And it's just like, what are you doing? I think men fail to realize there's a time and a place, so that's why I said, you're present, but don't be present. Like, don't have your presence in her mind, or like let her enjoy it, because it's not your experience, it's her experience that you're enjoying with her, but not it's your experience. And I think as men, sometimes we maybe kind of put ourselves in that we want to kind of, and I think for men, the reason why a lot of men are fascinated by squirting or women ejaculating is because for many men it's a form of sexual applause. Because we hear about women faking orgasm and things, and a lot of men are traumatized by that, so we hear about these stories that women faking orgasm. I've never orgasmed, barely orgasmed before this, and for a number of men, it's like, okay, this is maybe the thing that I know she is pleasured, or she is happy, she's satiated. And that's something that, and unfortunately now there's a lot of pressure on women to kind of experience an orgasm or experience squirting, when I don't think that, again, should be the goal. If she does, fantastic. If she can't or she doesn't, that's fantastic, as long as she's pleasured. And that's why, as much as, again, with Kunyaza, I like to speak about squirting and making sure women give themselves permission, not men giving them the permission,
Oh,
giving themselves the permission to enjoy pleasure. It's important that women don't feel pressurized that, oh, now I need to kind of, hit this new goal, this new sexual goal. And it's like, no, the goal is not squirting. The goal is not orgasm. The goal is your pleasure. But if you do manage to squirt, that's good. If you do manage to orgasm, that's good. If you do manage to have multiple orgasms, energy orgasm, what have you, that's good. But I think that's something that it's quite difficult because I'm trying to promote squirting, but at the same time, I don't want to put too much pressure, especially on women, to feel that you have to squirt, or the men saying, I've just read this book about squirting, let's go and do this in the bedroom, I'm going to do the tapping technique. I'll give you like, I get so many messages, like it's unbelievable. I get so many messages like, oh, Habib, I've done the squirting, I've done the tapping technique, I've done it for 3 minutes, but she hasn't squirted. What am I going to do next? And people are messaging me this for the first interaction with their partner. Oof. And I'm just like, wait, hold up, it's just, and that's something which I'm cognizant of, but at the same time, whilst again I want to promote the Kunyaza practice, I want to promote African sexuality, but I don't at the same time, I don't want to put too much pressure on women who are still trying to get used to their body or explore with their partner and give themselves permission to enjoy sexual pleasure. So it's a twofold exercise.
I love the nuance you bring to this. It's so important. It's so important. Just also what you said earlier, like the difference between he gives her an orgasm. No, he is supportive in her orgasmic experience, which is something else than again the transactional. Yeah, I really feel this. So so mindful a little bit of time because I have 100,000 questions for you. I think the way I, for instance, teach masculine and feminine, the masculine gets to very much enjoy the feminine in her experience. So is that also a little bit what's like underneath the whole Kunyasa practice, that yes, that it's there to help this woman like drop deeper and deeper into pleasure and sensation and open up, and there's all these like yummy things for her, but is he allowed to enjoy pleasuring her? Do you maybe understand my question? Like, yeah.
No, yes, most definitely. And I think, so yeah, part of Kunyaza, although yes, it's focused on women's pleasure or feminine pleasure, the man, or this is how it's taught, is it traditionally, you derive pleasure from your partner's pleasure. Yes. That's a form of pleasure as well. So again, rather than being a selfless lover or a selfish lover, you're a selfless lover, and you enjoy the same way. Some people, they find if they do a good deed, or if they buy someone a gift, and their face, the happiness that it brings to them, the joy it brings to their heart, that's something that they experience. Likewise in sexual interaction. So the more that your partner is experiencing, the more that the feminine is enjoying this experience, that should gratify the man as well. He should be satiated by that as well. So again, so whilst yes, men are taught that, or whilst the practice focuses on women's pleasure, men derive pleasure from seeing their partner pleasure, and I think that's important. Again, there's not much focus on the male ejaculation or the male orgasm with the Kunyaza practice, and I think maybe because even my own personal experience, I derive more pleasure when my partner's pleasured.
Yeah.
So that's how it's kind of taught. And again, some people think it's an ego boost because they'll be like, because again, some men still might walk when I did this, I did that. But at the end of the day, if anything, I look at it like, no, I've been allowed to enjoy this experience with her. Yeah. And that's something that's pleasurable in and of itself. So yes, it's something that men can enjoy, but primarily it's about making sure the woman is pleasured and you derive pleasure from that.
Yeah. Beautiful. I posted on my Instagram, like, what should I ask Habib? And I actually got a lot of questions on, I think, your book. I think it's called something with honey. Sorry, I forgot. Taste of Honey, right?
A Taste of Honey.
Yeah. Yes. And it's about, I hope I'm saying it correctly, erotology in Islam. And a lot of people were like, well, what? I've never heard anybody speak about this ever. And I don't talk about this a lot, but I was raised in Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, and Borneo and Brunei. So I've been around Islam most of my life. And so even I was like, well, what? So I'm super curious. Can you like give us a little sneak peek of what's in there?
Yeah, sure. So A Taste of Honey, that's a book which explores sexuality and erotology in traditional Islam. where I look at the history of Arab and Muslim scholars speaking about erotology. Before I should define actually what erotology is. Erotology is a study of eroticism and sex. So it's like the precursor of sexology. Sexology mainly just is a study of human sexuality, whereas erotology is a study of not only sexual behavior, but sexual desire, and you could say sexual philosophies as well. So like the most famous book of erotology is like the Kama Sutra. And a number of dating back to the 9th century up until like the 16th century, there were a number of Arabs and African Muslims who delved into the study of female sexuality, male sexuality, eroticism, sexual positions, in order to not only create, sustain, but maintain desire in a relationship. And they looked at women's passion or women's desire in particular. And with a lot of the early Muslim erotologists, they looked at the different types of not only male desire, but female desire. And some of them compartmentalized it into like 8 different parts. They looked at sexual compatibility, and that was something that the ancients were very fascinated by. And it's something that, which again is very shocking, especially even for many Muslims today, is that because a lot of Muslims see sex as a taboo, especially women's sexuality, and it's even, they're uncomfortable to even have this conversation. Whereas a lot of, prior to much of the Muslim world being colonized in the 19th century, a number of Muslims were very open about their sexuality and speaking about desire and intimacy and male-female relations, to the point where it wasn't a taboo for a woman to seek a divorce if she wasn't sexually satisfied in the bedroom. Like, women had the right to be sexually satisfied, whereas nowadays it's kind of seen as a big taboo in the Muslim community. So I wanted to revive this tradition of erotology, and which again gives, because I think similar to like Kunyaza, the issue, especially within a lot of traditional Muslim communities today, a lot of women do not feel, or Muslim women do not feel entitled to pleasure because of the shame that's been attached to female sexuality, things like that. So I wanted to show that there's this rich Muslim tradition dating back to the 9th century, speaking about eroticism, speaking about sex, speaking about women's sexuality in a pleasure positive way. So something that they can kind of maybe learn. And the same way, like we look back at the Kama Sutra. So the Kama Sutra, that's writing about eroticism from a Hindu perspective. You have Muslims speaking about eroticism and sexuality from an Islamic perspective. The same, you have other ancient Indians writing about sex and sexuality from a tantric perspective, or other traditions. So there's different cultures that have got their own views, which is, again, every culture's got their own views and value systems where they're exploring sex and sexuality. And I just wanted to kind of look at this topic from a cross-cultural analysis, and not only looking at it from how sex was understood in Arabian Peninsula in the 9th century, but how it was understood in the Iberian Peninsula from the 9th to like the 15th century, which is modern day Spain, because they were a bit more libertine and tolerant in their attitude towards sex and sexuality. And then if you're looking in North Africa compared to West Africa, it differs. So that's why I wanted to show that there's when we're speaking about sex or desire, people have different understandings, different interpretations, and it's something that we can perhaps learn from. And then that which you maybe agree with, or that you want to incorporate in your love life, you can, and that which you just maybe find fascinating in the form of reading, then again, it's something that maybe, you know, people can kind of benefit from. So that was it was a book that took me 10 years to write. I spent 3.5 years in Egypt. Because I came across a number of these, you know, these classic Arabic books writing about sex and, you know, women's sex secrets, and written by religious scholars. And for me, it was like, you know, coming from the UK, I was surprised by that. So I thought this might be really good initially to translate. And then I thought, okay, let me speak about other topics that are more relevant for the contemporary reader. And that culminated in the book, A Taste of Honey, which came out in 2015. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. I cannot wait to read it. It's also on the way here.
It's a thick book. Like, it's like, look how thick it is. It's like 300 pages. I'll tell you something, 300 pages. Kunyaza is like about 100 pages. But the difference between, and the crazy thing is that Kunyaza is obviously much more popular. And actually, I put my blood, sweat, and tears into A Taste of Honey, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't as well received as Kunyaza. And I think maybe because the way I delivered it. So Kunyaza is, I mean, A Taste of Honey is looking at religion, spirituality, sex, intimacy, history, a lot of topics. Whereas Kunyaza is just more or less sold as an African practice to help women squirt. Okay, I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
Even within the Muslim community. I think just, so that's why even sometimes I've noticed when you're delivering messages, And that's what I've realized, even in my workshops, is that you need to know your audience. So even if your message, you're trying to teach people to, again, I hear it from a number of women's sex educators, they're trying to teach men, how can they be more vulnerable in the bedroom? How can they be understand emotional intimacy? How can they understand the different women's love language and this, that, and the other? Because that's generally not a language that many men understand and use amongst themselves, it's just going to fall on deaf ears. But they might understand it and want it, or like even consent. I'm sure no sane man wants to have unconsensual sex, but they might not use the language that women generally use. So you just need to speak to them in a way that, or use a language that they understand to deliver that message. And that's something that I've learned over the last 10 years or so in terms of when I'm delivering, whether it's talks and workshops, just be cognizant of the person that you're delivering the message to, and then deliver it in a way that they can understand. And that's why, again, if I'm speaking on to men, I might be a bit more frank, and some people might say quite crude and, you know, very explicit with my language, because that's how they understand me. And I don't mind speaking that way. If I'm maybe speaking to someone who's maybe a bit more conservative, from a different background, of certain age groups, primarily women, I might be more delicate with my, but it doesn't mean that the messaging changes. It's just that who I'm delivering it to. I just have to be conscious of that. And that's something that with a lot of the early erotologists, even like with the Kama Sutra, the way they were writing, it's like people read it and be thinking, what kind of book is this? Is it because they'll have humor in it. They'll have like anecdotes of like short stories about entertainers, because when you're educating people, I think it's important to entertain as well. And some people, especially for me, they like humor. So if you're just speaking about something quite dry and it's just like very theoretical, it's not really going to penetrate the heart. Whereas if you add a bit of humor into it, it penetrates the heart and the ears without the person realizing it. And especially when you're speaking to men who've got the ego, they don't want to feel that you're telling me what to do, especially in the bedroom. So having a bit of ego or entertainment, or it might even be the person that is delivering that message is an attractive person, especially if it's an attractive woman, they're more likely to, oh, I'm listening, I'm admiring her beauty, but then actually slowly what she's saying is going to penetrate it. Do you understand? So you just have to be quite clever with how you're delivering messages. That's what I've realized.
Yeah, I so recognize this, but in the men's program that we have, we always ask them like, okay, what brought you in? And they're like, yeah, I thought I was going to be like this epic lover and learn like non-ejaculation and tantric sex. And I came out actually getting what I needed, which was connection and vulnerability and slowing down and feeling and emotions. And they're like, yeah. It's not that we didn't teach them those things, but it's actually not what mattered. But it is what like got their attention. I was like, oh, that's what I want, because that's less threatening, right? It's also their language. It's very different. Yeah, I love this. I love this. Thank you so much, Habib, for your time. I really, really, really appreciate, and I really appreciate you're so scholarly. You understand it so well, and at the same time, it's just so real life. I really appreciate that combination, because I can feel that you understand it and you get it and you've gone through history and the different cultures and all of that. And it's just like, hey, this is what like real people, what it looks like. Yeah.
No, thank you again for inviting me. And I really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, I just think, and keep up the good work you're doing as well. I just think it's important that we just, especially, I mean, because I'll be honest, when I first came across your profile, I was like, she's living workshops. I said, let me see. And I listened to a couple of your podcasts. Okay, I like it. Because it didn't come across, I'm being honest, it didn't come across as you telling men, don't do this, don't do that, or just damning men, or putting a lot of blame on men, which unfortunately, that's what I was thinking, okay, what type of men are you going to attract to your workshop? And I saw men from different backgrounds, different experiences, again, because you wasn't coming across as being judgmental, but it's more a case of, okay, let me understand where you're coming from, but also I'm going to share and maybe teach you something that you can probably benefit from, which I think is definitely something that a lot of men, and I've seen it from the testimonies, that can transform a number of their sex lives. So definitely kudos to you. I'll tip my hat off to you and just keep up the good work. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Habib. I so appreciate that. Hey, if people want to learn more about you, work with you, get your books, where can they go?
Yeah, so if you just type in Habeeb Akande, HABEEB AKANDE, actually on Instagram, I'm at Habeeb_Akande, and that's the same for Twitter as well. And if you want to check out my books, they're all on Amazon or on my website, rabah.com, rabah.com/store. So rabah.com/store.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Habib.
Thank you.